I found a family photo that wasn't real. Now I'm part of a ritual that won't end Reddit stories. You ever stare at an old photo and feel like it's lying to you? Like every smile captured in it was paid for with silence, and every hug was a carefully placed curtain hiding a stage full of rot. That's what it felt like whenever I looked at the one framed on the mantle. The one my mother insisted was the happiest day of our lives. It was taken the summer after my father came back, before everything began to peel apart. In that picture, we're on the front steps of the lake house, arms around each other, the sun helloing us like some divine approval. But the truth, like most things in my family, was never in the light. The backstory? Well, let's rewind a bit before the smiles and the shutter click. We weren't the kind of family that fought. No, we specialized in not talking. My mother, a woman with perfect lipstick and an iron will, believed in poise above all else. My father, the quiet storm type, had a stare that froze blood. And me, I was the glue, or at least I thought I was, until I realized I was more like the filler they used to hide the cracks. Smooth, compliant, forgettable. We lived in a house that was never messy, even when life was. We had dinner every night, not because we liked each other, but because it was expected. Expectations were everything in our house. It all changed when he left, not for good, just for a while. As my mother had said, he went to clear his head, which was our family code for did something unforgivable. But let's not discuss it. He was gone for 8 months. When he came back, it was like nothing had happened. He walked through the door, set his keys in the bowl by the foyer, and kissed my mother on the cheek. She didn't flinch. That's when I knew something deeper had cracked, because she didn't even flinch. The lake trip was her idea. A reset, she called it, said we needed fresh air and family time, like that would wipe away whatever had happened in those 8 months. But I had seen her during those months. How she paced at night, how she poured wine into tea mugs, how she started sleeping on just one side of the bed, even though no one was there to take the other. You can't just press reset on something that's burned. Still, we went. Packed up the SUV with coolers, towels, board games no one played, and enough tension to strangle a beer. The lake house was a 2-hour drive from our city home, tucked in a dense patch of pine and maple, the kind of place where cell reception goes to die and silence gets louder with every passing minute. My mother kept humming old songs she hadn't sung in years, like her voice could stitch together the silence. My father drove without saying much, hands tight on the wheel. I sat in the back, watching them in the rearview, wondering if they saw what I saw. The house itself was as pristine as I remembered. It had belonged to my grandparents, passed down like a fragile secret. Nothing had changed. Same creaky steps, same faded wallpaper, same glass bowl full of pin cones that no one ever touched. Familiarity can be comforting or claustrophobic, depending on what you're running from. We unloaded, unpacked, and fell into roles like actors returning to a long-running play. Mother made sandwiches. Father stacked firewood. I wandered the edge of the lake, watching dragonflies skim the water like thoughts I couldn't quite catch. That night, we ate by candlelight. Not because it was romantic or meaningful, but because the power had blinked out during a storm and no one knew how to reset the fuse box. We chewed in near silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. I remember the way the candlelight danced on their faces, casting flickering shadows that made them look like strangers. After dinner, my father took out his old camera, the one he always used for memories. He said we should take a photo, all of us together like old times. My mother hesitated just for a second, then agreed. We stood on the front steps, posed, smiled on cue, and heard the click. That was the photo, the one she framed, the one that lied. But here's where it started to change, where the real story began. That night, after the photo, I couldn't sleep. The air felt wrong, heavy in a way it hadn't before. I went to the kitchen for water and saw my father outside smoking. He didn't smoke, at least not before he left. I watched him from the window, the ember of his cigarette glowing like a secret. The next morning, my mother was up early, too early. She was scrubbing the stovetop with a manic energy, like if she could just get it clean enough, everything else would make sense. She asked if I slept okay, and I lied. That's what we did. We lied. Over the next few days, the lake house became a stage for their rehearsed kindness. He brought her coffee. She laughed at his jokes. They played cards after dinner like old lovers. But it was wrong. Too smooth. Too practiced. I began to notice things. A drawer left open with a letter inside, my father's phone hidden under a towel, the bruises on my mother's arm that she insisted were from bumping into the screen door. I didn't ask questions. I wasn't supposed to. But the glue was beginning to crack. And once it starts, you can't stop it. There was one night I'll never forget. The storm had come back, harder this time. Rain pounded the roof like fists, and thunder cracked the sky open. I heard them arguing, not shouting, arguing. That cold, deliberate kind of fight that cuts deeper than any scream. I crept to the hallway and listened. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough. You promised. It wasn't supposed to happen again. Do you think she knows? That last one froze me. She was me. And yes, I did know. Not the details, but enough to realize that the story our family told, the one in the photo, was a fable wrapped in a nightmare. The next morning, my father was gone. Just gone. No note, no explanation. His clothes were still in the closet, his toothbrush by the sink, but he was nowhere to be found. My mother called the police after 4 hours. They didn't take it seriously at first. Grown man maybe just went for a drive. But he didn't come back. Not that night. Not the next. Not ever. And that was just the beginning. What followed was a slow unraveling, like pulling a thread that never ends. My mother became something else entirely. Harder, colder, almost mechanical. She never cried. Never spoke his name again. Just resumed life as though he'd never existed. She even left the photo on the mantel, like some kind of cursed totem. People asked questions. We didn't answer. Time moved on, but the questions didn't. It was years later when I found the other photo, tucked inside an old book at the lake house. This one wasn't framed. It wasn't posed. It was taken from behind a tree, blurry, hurried. My father standing with a woman I didn't recognize. Not my mother, they were arguing. Her face was contorted, mid-yell. His hand was raised, not striking, but tense. Behind them was the lake. In the corner of the photo was something else, something that made my stomach drop. Me. I was standing at the water's edge, back turned, skipping stones. I had no memory of it. That's when the twist started to form, like a storm cloud on the edge of memory. I showed my mother the photo. Her face drained of color, but she didn't speak. Just took the photo, folded it in half, and threw it in the fire. That was the first time I saw her cry. Just one tear, then nothing, and the next day she gone too, not missing, not dead, just gone. She emptied her bank account, left her phone, and vanished. Just like him. I was alone now, left with a photo that lied and a truth that refused to die. But even then, I hadn't seen the full picture. Not yet. That came later, in a place I never thought to look, in the attic of the lake house, behind an old trunk, hidden in the wall. A second photo. A second truth. But that's a story for another part, and trust me, it gets worse. Much worse. There's something about attics that feels like stepping into memory itself. Dust, laced air, forgotten boxes, and the sound of silence pressing against your chest like a weight. I never liked going up there. Even as a kid, the attic of the lake house creeped me out. It had a pull, like something hiding just beyond the light, waiting. After my mother vanished, I didn't return to the house right away. I spent months in the city, trying to wrap my head around how two people could disappear from my life without leaving a trace, like ghosts shedding skin and memory. But I kept thinking about that last photo. The one with the woman I didn't recognize, the argument frozen in time, and me at the edge of the lake, blissfully unaware of the chaos unraveling behind me. That photo had burned, but its image burned deeper into me. It was a damp October morning when I finally drove back to the lake house. Leaves had fallen like rust across the road, and the air had that bite that smells of endings. I parked in the same gravel patch we always used and stared up at the windows like they might blink. The house looked smaller somehow, less like a family getaway and more like a haunted diorama. I stepped inside and was hit by the smell of old pine and mildew. No one had touched the place in almost a year. The photo was still there on the mantel. Our smiling lie, still pretending everything had been fine. I wandered the rooms for a while, unsure why I'd come. Maybe part of me thought my mother had returned, or that I'd find some letter left behind, a confession maybe. But there was nothing, just furniture shrouded in dust and silence so thick it felt like insulation. I made my way upstairs, feet creaking on every step, heart thudding with an old childhood fear. When I reached the attic door, I hesitated. I hadn't been up there since I was a teenager. It had always been the one place my mother told me never to go alone. Too much junk, she'd said. Dangerous beams. But it wasn't the structure she was worried about. I pulled the string and the wooden ladder groaned down. The attic breathed out warm, stale air. I climbed up slowly, flashlight in hand. The dust up there was so thick it floated like mist. Everything was just as I remembered. Boxes stacked high, old furniture draped in sheets, a rocking horse with one eye missing. But there was one thing I hadn't remembered, and it called to me like a heartbeat. At the far end, behind an old cedar trunk, I saw a plank of the wall that didn't sit quite right. It was slightly ajar, as if something behind it had pushed. I moved the trunk, coughing from the dust cloud it unleashed, and pried the board loose. Inside was a gap. Not a full room, just a crawlspace between the walls. And inside that crawlspace, nestled between yellowing newspapers and mummified mice, was a box. Not a fancy one, just a plain wooden box, unmarked. It was surprisingly light. I sat on the floor and opened it, and that's when everything began to shift. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Some black and white, others faded Polaroids. They all had one thing in common: my father. In each photo, he stood beside a different woman. Smiling, laughing, arm around her waist. None of them were my mother. At first, I thought maybe they were old girlfriends, snapshots from before he met her. But some of the photos were recent, within the last 5 years. One had a date scrawled on the back in his handwriting, May 4th, 2017. That was during one of his business trips. I flipped through more and felt my skin tighten. Each woman had a look. Similar features, like he had a type. But what chilled me wasn't the resemblance. It was that none of the women appeared more than once. At the bottom of the box was a leather-bound notebook. Inside, he'd written names, dates, locations, sometimes just initials, sometimes a full entry. One read L. Met her at the bar near St. James. She likes red wine, doesn't ask questions. Reminds me of C. Won't make the same mistake again. Another one. Took J to the cabin. Said she loved the quiet. Said she trusted me. Left before dawn. She's gone now. That word, gone, appeared a lot. She's gone. Gone like the others? Gone. And no one's come asking. I dropped the notebook like it burned and stood up too fast, nearly knocking my head on a beam. My father hadn't just disappeared. He had erased himself, one woman at a time. And my mother, she must have known. That's why she burned the photo. That's why she vanished. Not to escape him, but to escape what she'd discovered. I took the box down with me, hands trembling. I spread the photos out on the kitchen table, trying to make sense of it. One photo near the bottom caught my eye. Not because of who was in it, but because of where. It was taken at the lake house. Not on the porch, not near the dock, but deep in the woods behind it. I recognized the fallen tree in the background. My father stood with a woman I hadn't seen in any of the other photos. She was smiling, holding his hand. On the back, it simply said, "Hey, last one. No more after this." I felt a wave of nausea and had to sit down. That spot in the woods, I knew it. We used to play there as kids. Build forts, climb trees. But I remembered something else too. One summer, years ago, the ground had given way beneath me near that same tree. I'd twisted my ankle in the fall. My father had yelled at me, not because I was hurt, but because I'd gone too far. I never understood why he was so angry. Now I did. The next morning I hiked into the woods with a shovel. It took hours to find the exact spot. Everything looks different as an adult. Trees feel smaller. Paths you thought were endless are really just short trails. But I found the tree. Bent, scarred, unmistakable. I started digging. The soil was loose at first, then thick with roots. Every shovel full felt like pulling teeth. And then, clink. Metal? I dropped to my knees and scraped with my hands. It was a box. No, a trunk. I pulled it free, heart pounding. It was locked, but the wood had rotted just enough for me to pry it open with a rock. Inside were bones. Not just bones. Remnants of clothing, a rusted bracelet, hair that still clung to the fabric. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. I didn't know her name. I didn't need to. She was one of the women. Maybe the last. Maybe not. But she had been here all along, buried beneath years of pine needles and silence. I went to the police, gave them the photos, the journal, even led them to the grave. They asked questions I couldn't answer. Where was my father? Did I know the victims? Was there more? I told them everything I could. They kept the evidence and promised to investigate. But in the weeks that followed, nothing happened. No headlines, no arrests, no closure. It was like the forest had swallowed the truth again. I went back to the house once more, this time to pack. I couldn't stay there. Not with the attic, not with the photo, not with the ghost of my family watching from the walls. But before I left, I found something I'd missed. In the back of my mother's closet, behind her old coats, was a suitcase. Inside were passports, 4 of them, all with her face, different names, different countries, different hair colors. The woman who raised me wasn't just running. She'd been prepared to disappear for years. And then I found the final envelope, no name, just a single note inside. In her handwriting, it read, "You were never meant to find this, but now that you have, go before it finds you." Not him, not them, it. That's when I realized something else. In the photo from the woods, the one labeled A, last one, there was something I hadn't seen before. In the background, behind the tree, barely visible, was a shadow. Not a person, not an animal, a shape tall, thin, watching. The thing is, after I left, I started seeing it too. In reflections, in windows, in dreams, a shape that doesn't move until you blink. My parents didn't just disappear. They were hiding, running, not from what they did, but from what they found, or maybe what they invited in. But that's a story that doesn't end here, because the truth isn't in the attic, or the woods, or even in the photos. The truth is following me, and it's getting closer. There's a sickness in silence, a kind of rot that spreads the longer no one speaks its name. After I left the lake house, I didn't tell anyone what I saw in that photo. Not the police. Not the few friends I still trusted. Because how do you explain that kind of darkness? You don't. You bury it. You run from it. You convince yourself it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by some branch, a smudge on the lens. But deep down, I knew better. I could feel it following me. Not in footsteps or phone calls, but in a shifting of the air, a pulling at the edges of reality. Wherever I went, something came with me. At first, I tried to ignore it. I moved back to the city, rented a new apartment on the 8th floor of a building with too much glass and not enough soul. I told myself I was starting over. I threw away the old photo, the copy I'd made before giving the rest to the authorities. I stopped answering calls from the detective. I even changed my number. But the silence didn't leave me. In fact, it got louder. Nights became impossible. I'd wake at exactly 3:13 every morning, heart hammering, drenched in sweat. Always 3:13. I started leaving lights on. Stopped sleeping with the door closed. But none of it helped. It started small. Objects in my apartment weren't where I left them. A mug I hadn't used suddenly in the sink. The front door unlocked when I was sure I'd locked it. Then came the smells, pine needles, wet earth, that same scent from the woods behind the lake house. I even found dirt on my bedroom floor one morning. right next to my bed. Like someone or something had been standing there, watching me. One night, I heard knocking. Not loud, just persistent. It came from the closet. 3 slow knocks, then nothing. I sat up in bed, pulse thudding in my ears, unable to move. I wanted to scream, but my voice stayed lodged in my throat. I waited. Nothing else happened. Eventually, the sun came up, and everything seemed normal again. But something had shifted. The air in my apartment felt heavy, like a pressure just under the skin. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was traumatized. Maybe this was all in my head. I booked an appointment with a therapist. Told her a sanitized version, just enough to get her concerned, but not enough to get me committed. She nodded and scribbled notes and said words like dissociation and hypervigilance. I nodded back, played the part, but even she noticed something off. During our 3rd session, she paused mid-sentence, staring behind me, her face drained of color. When I turned to look, there was nothing there. She smiled awkwardly and said it was just a trick of the light. I never went back. The dreams got worse. Always the woods. Always the sound of digging. Sometimes I was the one digging. Sometimes I was the one being buried. And always, just at the edge of the trees, that shape. Watching, it didn't move. It didn't speak. But it felt hungry, like it had waited long enough. Then came the tapes. They arrived in an unmarked envelope, slid under my door without a sound. Inside were 3 cassette tapes, unlabeled. I didn't even own a tape player, but something told me not to throw them out. I found an old recorder at a thrift store the next day. Plugged it in, pressed play. The first tape was static for nearly a minute. Then a voice, my father's. He sounded strained, as if speaking from a place of deep cold. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't finish it. I tried. God knows I tried, but it won't go back. It won't sleep again. Then silence. Then something else. A sound like breathing. Slow, wet, wrong. The second tape was worse. It wasn't even speech, just screaming. Not voice, dozens, maybe hundreds. Screaming in pain, in rage, in grief. I yanked the plug before it ended. My hands were shaking. My eyes were wet. I hadn't even realized I was crying. I didn't play the 3rd one. I buried it under books in the back of my closet. That night, I heard the knocking again. This time, not from the closet, from inside the walls. The following morning, I made a decision. I couldn't outrun this thing. Whatever it was, whatever my father had awakened, it wasn't done. Not with him, not with my mother, not with me. So I did the one thing I swore I never would. I went back. The lake house looked abandoned. Boards on the windows, mail overflowing in the box. The path to the front door was overgrown with thorns and ivy. Nature was reclaiming it, as if trying to swallow the secrets buried beneath. I didn't bring anything. No phone, no flashlight, just the key, still on the chain I kept hidden in my sock drawer. The lock clicked open like it had been waiting. Inside, the air was still. Dust hung in thick columns where sunlight pierced the boarded cracks. The photo was gone. So was everything else I remembered. Furniture overturned. Claw marks on the floor. And a smell, stronger than before. Parth. Rot. I made my way to the attic. This time the crawl space was empty. No box. No journal. But something else was there now. A symbol carved into the wood. It looked ancient. Circles within circles. Sharp angles intersecting at impossible places. My hands itched just looking at it. I traced it without meaning to. My fingers moved on their own. That's when the house breathed, not creaked. Breathed, as if the walls themselves were inhaling. I stumbled back, slipped, and hit my head on the beam. When I came to, it was dark. The attic door was closed. My flashlight was gone. I fumbled my way down, but the ladder was no longer there. Just a hole where it had been. I was trapped, or maybe chosen, because then I heard it, a voice. Not loud, not even distinct. More like an echo inside my skull. A whisper that vibrated against my teeth. You opened the door. I screamed not from fear, but recognition. It was my mother's voice. But it wasn't. It spoke again. He offered us many. You were supposed to be the last what? I couldn't ask. My mouth wouldn't open. My body was frozen. But in my mind, I saw flashes. My father digging, crying, screaming. My mother burning something in the woods. The shadow in the photo stepping closer. Then silence. And I was no longer in the attic. I was outside in the woods, back at the tree. The grave was open again, empty, but something was crawling out of it. Not a person, not even a creature. A shape, like oil and shadow and teeth. It rose slowly, deliberately, and behind it, dozens more. Each shaped like a memory I had tried to forget. One looked like my father, mouth stretched wide. One like my mother, eyes hollow, bleeding pine sap. One like me, but older. Smiling, I ran. But the forest didn't end. Every path I took curved back into itself. Every tree whispered my name. When I finally collapsed, gasping, the sun rose. And I was back in the city, in my bed, like nothing had happened. Except the dirt on my floor was fresh. The door was open, and carved into the wall behind my headboard was the same symbol from the attic. I haven't slept since, because I know what happens if I do. I see them, they wait for me. They are patient, they are hungry, and worst of all, they remember. You ever have that feeling like someone's staring at you, but when you turn, there's nothing there? Not just an empty room, something emptier than empty. A void where presence should be. That's what my life became after the night I woke in my bed with the fresh dirt on the floor and that symbol carved behind my head. The symbol, sharp and wrong, like geometry designed by a mind that never learned kindness. It wasn't just etched into the paint. It was dug deep into the drywall, like it had grown there, or worse, like it had been waiting under the surface all along. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call friends or the police. How do you explain to someone that you might be haunted not by ghosts, but by something your father made a deal with? Something your mother tried to escape. Something that wears your face when you sleep. The days started to bleed together. I'd see people on the street that looked like the women from the photographs. One of them passed me outside a bookstore, her head tilted just enough to show a slice of a scar running up her jawline. Another sat across from me on the train, eyes vacant, hands too still. They were wrong in a way that only I seemed to notice. A flicker in the pupils, a pause before blinking. Movements just half a second behind the world, like a bad signal on a screen. At first, I thought it was my guilt, that I'd uncovered something I wasn't meant to see, and this was my punishment. But then the dreams came back, louder. Not just of the woods or the shadow rising from the grave, but of places I'd never been. An underground room filled with rows of chairs, all facing a blank wall. A tunnel that hummed like a heartbeat. A well filled not with water, but mirrors. And the worst one, the room with the table. Always the table. Metal, cold, stained. And always me on it. Strapped, eyes wide, forced to stare at a door that never opened, until it did. And then I would wake gasping every single time at 3:13 a.m. No matter what time I went to bed, no matter what I did, it was always 3:13. That number, 13 past 3, started appearing everywhere. Receipts, clocks, hotel room numbers. Once, even burned into toast. I laughed the first time. The 5th time, I threw the toast away. The 10th, I stopped eating. Then the voices started. Not out loud, not at first. They began as thoughts that didn't belong to me. She never told you everything. He was only the beginning. You're part of the debt. They'd come while I was brushing my teeth or standing at a red light. I'd hear them in the water pipes, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the static between songs on the radio. Whispering, reciting things I never said. Some nights I'd hear myself talking in my sleep. Once I recorded it. I played it back. What I heard wasn't my voice, it was hers. My mother's, saying words in a language I don't understand. But I recognized the rhythm. It matched the tape I never played. The 3rd one. I told myself I'd never touch it, that I'd never listen, but of course I did. Curiosity is cruel like that. It scratches at your brain until the pain of not knowing is worse than whatever the knowing might cost. So one night, I took the tape from the closet, cleared a space on the floor, and pressed play. It started with silence. Thick, wet, like the inside of a mouth. Then a voice, low and trembling, muttering a name. Over and over. The name wasn't mine, it wasn't my father's, but it made my skin crawl like I was being unzipped from the inside. Then came the sound, a scratching, rhythmic, measured, followed by a voice. My voice, but not me, it said. Do you remember what he buried? The tape ended there. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I started seeing people in mirrors who weren't in the room. My reflection would linger half a second longer after I turned away. Sometimes I'd smile when I wasn't smiling. Sometimes I'd blink wrong. Once I caught my reflection mouthing something, 3 syllables. I tried to lip read. I recorded it, played it back again and again. Best guess. Let it in. I began locking every door, every cabinet. It didn't help. Objects would vanish and return in impossible places. I found my keys inside the oven, my shoes in the bathtub. Once my own name written in soap on the bathroom mirror, backwards. And then came the knock, not from the closet, not from the walls, from inside my head. It was like a drumbeat against my skull, 3 beats, a pause, then again. It wouldn't stop until I whispered highs. That was the first time the mirror cracked on its own. I packed a bag, didn't care where I was going, just away. But when I reached the front door, it was already open. Standing in the hallway was a man. No, not a man. A shape wearing a man. Its eyes were wrong, mouth too wide. Hands hung like they'd forgotten how to move. It smiled, and the smile didn't end. Then it said, "You were supposed to be the 13th. And then it turned and walked away. I didn't follow. I couldn't. I shut the door, locked it, bolted it, sat in the middle of the floor until morning. When I opened the door again, the hallway was empty. But taped to the inside of the door was a photograph. New, glossy. Mick, sleeping. Taken from inside my bedroom. The date scribbled on the back, May 4th, 2025. It hadn't happened yet, but that was today. I ran. Left everything. Took only the photo and the 3rd tape. I drove until the roads stopped having names. Slept in my car. Ate whatever I could find. Avoided reflective surfaces. Avoided people. Especially the ones who look just a little too familiar. But there's no outrunning memory. No escaping something that's part of you. One night, I found a town. Or rather, it found me. Wasn't on any map. No highway signs. Just a flicker of lights in the trees. I followed it. It was small. 5 buildings, maybe 6. No people, except one. She stood in the middle of the street like she'd been waiting for years. It was my mother, but wilder, eyes like ice and fire. She didn't speak. Just handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside, scrawled in that same handwriting I knew too well, were 3 words, "It needs blood." Before I could ask, she was gone, vanished, like she never existed. I unfolded the paper again. There was something else written on the back. Coordinates. Back to the lake house, back to where it began. And below them one more sentence, "He didn't awaken it, you did." And now I remember. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know what the knocking really is. It's not coming to get me. It's waiting to be let back in. Because it was never outside. It was always underneath. Beneath the lake, beneath the attic, beneath my skin. And now it remembers me. Because I finally remember it. They say memory is a prison you build with your own hands. Brick by brick, lie by lie, until you're so deep inside the walls you forget the world outside ever existed. That's what remembering felt like. Not like recovering lost pieces, but like watching the walls I'd built around the truth crumble one by one. And once I saw it, really saw it, I couldn't unsee what had always been lurking at the edge of my life, its fingers brushing against me even when I thought I was alone. I followed the coordinates, back to the lake house, the same crooked driveway, the same leaning mailbox. But this time, it wasn't abandoned. The boards on the windows were gone. The front door stood wide open, swaying in the wind like it had been expecting me. And though I hadn't stepped foot inside in weeks, I could hear it breathing again, that low, soft, impossible breath. The house didn't welcome me. It absorbed me. Inside, the lights worked. Not the overheads, but the lamps, every single one flickering with a soft golden glow. Someone had been living there. I moved slowly, careful not to touch anything. But the air was warm now, scented with pine and smoke like a fire had just burned out. In the kitchen, the table was set. 3 places: plates, forks, cloth napkins. A glass of wine half finished. I didn't drink. I never had. But my glass was already poured, deep red and still rippling, as if someone had just set it down. There were photos on the table. New ones. All of me, not just recent. Current. One showed me filling up my car at a gas station I didn't remember. Another captured me walking down a motel hallway I hadn't stayed in. The last one. It was of me standing right there, in the kitchen looking at the photos. My hand trembled. I turned slowly, expecting someone. Behind me, nothing. Just the house. Watching. I took the photo, folded it into my pocket, walked toward the back of the house. Toward the woods, toward the tree. The forest hadn't changed. Still dense, still too quiet. The light barely filtered through the branches, and every step felt like wading into breath. I reached the tree by instinct more than memory. The bark still split down the center from the last time I'd dug. But this time I didn't need a shovel. The ground gave way beneath my feet. One moment I was standing, the next I was falling. I landed hard, damp earth, bones jarred, lungs emptied. I sat up, cuffing dirt. I was in a tunnel, not natural. The walls were carved, smooth and wet. Symbols ran along them, etched deep in the stone, some still bleeding, something too dark to be blood. There was only one direction to go. Forward. The tunnel pulsed, not with sound, but with presence. I could feel something ahead. Waiting, and with each step, I remembered more. Not just about my father or the women or the lies. I remembered the game I used to play as a kid. The counting game. It started at 13 and worked backward. I never knew why I played it. Never remembered who taught me, but now I did. He did. My father, he used to say, start at 13 and you'll always end up safe. Except I never reached one. Something always interrupted me. Now I knew why. 13 wasn't the start of safety. It was the mark of sacrifice. 13 people, 13 souls, 13 deals. I was number 13. The tunnel ended in a chamber. Huge, circular, carved from the earth like a mouth. In the center stood the table from my dreams. Metal, stained, waiting. And behind it the thing. Not a creature. Not a man. A shape that flickered, like flame trapped underwater. No eyes, just presence. And it spoke, not out loud, inside. He offered you freely. I couldn't move, could barely breathe. But you resisted. You ran. You broke the chain. I wanted to scream, wanted to ask why me. But the question was already answered. Because I was the first one born after the pact, after the 13th promise was made. I wasn't supposed to survive. But my mother saved me. She hid me, made the lake house the cradle and the prison. And then she ran. But the debt never vanished, and now I was here, the final offering. It stepped toward me. I saw its body pulse, faces flickering inside its shape. My father, my mother, the women, all of them, sobbing, laughing, scream. It reached for me, and I did something I didn't understand. I stepped forward too, because I remembered everything. Not just the dreams, but the ritual, the reversal. There was one way out, a trade. Not blood. Memory. I whispered the words my mother said on the tape. The ones I didn't understand, until now. They meant, take what was given. Forget what you are. The creature paused. It tilted its head. I felt the room grow still. And then it screamed. A noise like a million bones snapping. I collapsed, nose bleeding, ears ringing. And when I opened my eyes, I was back in the lake house, sitting at the table, the wine glass full, the photos gone. Outside, the sun was rising. I stumbled out, gasping, disoriented. There was no tunnel, no symbol on the tree, just dirt. Pine birds. I drove, didn't stop. City, apartment. Door. I collapsed on the bed, shaking, and slept. I woke up 12 hours later. No dreams, no voices, nothing. Days passed. Then weeks. I started to feel normal. The knocks didn't come. The mirror didn't crack. The reflection didn't linger. The number 3 to 13 stopped haunting me. Until tonight, when I got the package. No return address, just a box. Inside, 13 photos, not of me, of strangers, each standing near a different lake house. Each with the same eyes, each dated before I was born. And under them, a note. in my mother's handwriting. You reversed the offering, but someone always pays. Keep watching. Count backward. On the back of the note, just one number, 12. And now I remember what comes next. It's strange how peace can feel like a warning. In the weeks after the box arrived, the one with the 13 photos and that note from my mother, life fell disturbingly quiet. No knocking, no symbols, no figures in the mirror. The world moved normally again. I even tried to believe I'd won, that the nightmare had a boundary and I'd stepped out of it for good. But deep down, something inside me never stopped counting. 12. That was the number scrawled on the back of my mother's note. Not a warning, I see now, but a countdown. And I was the one ticking forward. I tried to ignore it. I left the city. I moved under a fake name, a fake job in a town so small it didn't even have streetlights. I burned the photos, all 12 of them. I even burned the note, but the number stayed in my dreams, in the corners of every clock, on receipts, on gravestones, on children's drawings. It appeared when I blinked and vanished when I looked. Always 12, and then it began again. I woke up one morning with a new photo on my doorstep. Just one, not printed on glossy paper this time, etched into glass. A girl I didn't know, maybe 9 years old, standing in front of a lake that wasn't our lake, but looked close enough to bleed into memory. The girl had eyes too old for her face, and on the back of the frame, a single word scratched in jagged lines 11. I dropped the photo. It shattered. Inside the frame, hidden in the backing, was a tooth. Human, baby tooth, still bloody. I threw up in the sink. My reflection stared at me like it didn't recognize who I was anymore. I knew then this wasn't over. I hadn't escaped. I had taken their place. And now, I was the collector. It didn't make sense at first. Why me? Why not someone else in the bloodline? But that's what the ritual meant. The reversal. When I offered memory instead of blood, I didn't close the door. I flipped it. I turned the chain around. The offering had to continue, just in reverse. And I had become the new vessel, the new key. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the door, and something on the other side wanted it open again. The next came 3 days later. A young man, maybe 20, face scratched out in the photo. This one was burned at the edges, found under my pillow. I don't remember sleeping that night. Don't remember dreaming. But the moment I touched it, my nose started bleeding. 10. I didn't know where the number was coming from. I didn't know who was choosing them. But I knew what it meant, and it was counting down. Faster now. Relentless. Each photo arrived differently. One delivered by a child I'd never seen before, who whispered, "He says thank you," then vanished before I could respond. One was embedded in the screen of my phone, static between apps, a face flickering for a single frame before the screen shattered in my hand. One appeared tattooed in the condensation of my bathroom mirror, and with each, the number dropped. 9, 8, 7. And with each, I began to change. I'd wake up with mud under my nails, smells in my nose, rot sulfur blood. I began hearing their names, the names of the women in my father's photos, and others. Men, children, strangers, people I hadn't met, but somehow remembered, because their memories were in me now. I didn't dream anymore. I remembered. Every moment of every offering, every promise whispered in darkness, every scream swallowed by earth. I tried to stop it. I drove to the police, tried to confess. They smiled politely, took notes. But when I left the station, I saw my face on the wanted screen, not for crimes, for missing person. By the date, it said I disappeared 3 weeks ago. But I remembered driving there. I remembered the conversation. I wasn't missing. I was erased. Number 6 came in a jar. A heart, still beating. The photo wrapped around it showed a woman I knew. Not from life, but from the attic, from the box. One of his, one of ours. And the label just read, "You can't just bury the past. It always rises, (5). And then came the knock. Not at the door. Not in the walls, in my chest. 3 beats, a pause. Then again, I screamed. The mirror cracked without touching it. My skin itched like something underneath wanted out. I checked my chest. Bruises shaped like fingerprints circled my ribs. Then came the voice. Hers. My mother's. You started it. Now finish it. But I didn't know what finish meant. There were still 5 left. 5 I hadn't seen. Until I did. Not in photos, in person. I walked into a diner in the middle of nowhere, trying to outrun the shadow that never chased but always arrived, and there they were. 5 people. All seated at different tables. All looking at me, and all with my eyes. Not similar. Identical. They smiled in sync. The waitress blinked and looked confused, as if for a moment she saw them too. Then they were gone. But I knew what they were. The final 5. Not victims, replacements, and I was next. Not to die, to complete. I drove back to the lake house for the last time. The place was different now, not decaying, reborn. Every board, every tile, every whisper rebuilt perfectly like time had reversed around it. The table was there again, and on it 13 empty frames, except one. Mine, the photo from the kitchen, the one that had shown me standing right there, looking at myself. The one from before. I stepped inside. The air was too still. The house too alive. I placed my hand on the frame and remembered the final piece. The offering was never just blood. It was presence. One becomes many, but many always return to one. I had been the 13th, but the first had never left, and now it was time. I closed my eyes. I spoke the words again. The reversal in reverse. Take what was forgotten. Remember what you are. The room screamed. And when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the house. I wasn't anywhere. I was inside. Inside the thing. The vessel. I saw all of them. My father. The women. The strangers. The mirror faces. The shadows. I wasn't watching them. They were watching me. And one by one, they stepped into my skin. I felt every memory rush back, every moment of every life folded into a single heartbeat. I became the chain, and the countdown stopped. Because there was no one left to count. Until today, when I opened my eyes in someone else's room, in someone else's house, and saw a child staring at me, he said, "You look different." I smiled, and handed him a photo of him, standing at the edge of a lake, with my AK, just one number, 13. Because in the end, the door never closes. It just swings, quietly, waiting, and one was never enough. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.